welcome you all to the first of our CPD sessions, which is about from the capability model, and the first one is about our coaching agreement. So we are going to be doing our first session around the coaching agreement. So there's a few things that we're going to bring in. We're going to be looking at why do we need a coaching agreement? Then we're going to be talking about what makes a good coaching agreement, and then some of the pitfalls if we don't have a coaching agreement in place. So we'll be looking at some of the skills about forming a really, really good coaching agreement, because I think it's a key. It's key for the beginning of any kind of relationship with any of your clients, whoever they are. So what I'll firstly do is introduce our distinguished guests, our panel members. So I'm Adele, and I'm the head of professional standards. And David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm David Munro-Jones. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and also currently head of accreditation. Or acting head of accreditation, I should say.
And we're delighted to introduce Monique, who's with us today. Monique, do you want to say a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, thanks, Adele. I'm Monique Deneau, and I am with MD Consulting, but I am a certified and accredited coach with the IAPC&M. So I'm really happy to be here as part of the panel discussion today. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, Monique, and thank you also because you were one of the co-authors of our book, The How to Win and Keep Clients. So we've done quite a bit of work together recently, haven't we?
Yes,
endless editing of that book, and so I've got a copy here if anybody wants it. So if you want to leave a note in the comments, I'm happy to send you one out. So this is a book, fantastic book, How to Win and Keep Clients. So anyway. So the first bit, David, would it be useful for you to give us an outline of the capability model, just to sort of tell people what it's all about, really?
Yeah, sure. So briefly, because there was a lot of work went into the model itself. We used to have a sort of a competency-based model, but Oxford Brookes wrote an interesting article about the difference between sort of competency, and capabilities. And as a result of that, and the work that we did and some additional research, we went down the capability route rather than the competency route, which gives a much more holistic and accurate view of a coach's abilities, rather than just sort of trying to pigeonhole them into competencies. So the model itself looks really like four key principles. You have your underpinning knowledge and understanding, which sort of really underpins everything. You then have the skills and behaviors, which is drawn from that underpinning knowledge. You have a period of reflection, and one of the key things that sort of can't be understated, and it does go back to the coaching agreement, so I'll make a very tenuous link at this point and a more substantial link a little bit later, hopefully. That's the reflection, for example, the reflection on the coaching session might be, oh, well, that didn't go as well as it might have done, and part of that might then lead into, I wonder if that's because there's something wrong with the agreement, as well as a whole host of other things, as I say, which I'll come back to. And then you have the drive for continued professional development, and they're all intrinsically linked. So if one of them stops, then they all stop. So the model is designed as if it's sort of four individual cogs, but because they're all interconnected. And that space in the middle, so like the green space that was on the newsletter that went out and is on the website, or will be on the website so when we update the model, is what we call the facilitative alliance, which is a very big and technical way of saying this is the relationship, the facilitation between the coach and the coachee, and it's a two-way thing. So coaching isn't done to somebody. It's part of the process, so it's an interaction, and therefore, what comes out of the skills and behaviors piece, or really what we call the 10 capability areas, and from the 10 capability areas, the first piece of that is establishing the coaching agreement.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So that just gives you a flavour of the capability model, and as David said, there's 10 areas, and we are focusing on today the coaching agreement, and I think it's sort of quite timely because that should it ultimately form the beginning of any coaching relationship that you would have with your clients. Monique, what's important about a coaching agreement for you in your experience?
The coaching agreement is critical in a couple of ways. So, for example, when coaches are coaching their clients, in my case, my target client is the corporate executive. And part of the role of the corporate executive is to coach their direct reports and help them develop, help them grow, put them on a career path. So in all of those cases, the coaching agreement is important to establish the boundaries of the coaching relationship, the length of the coaching relationship, what's going to be covered, and to really make sure that whoever's being coached, whether it's a client being coached by a coach or a direct report being coached by their manager, that everyone is on the same page. So I think it is critical before any coaching begins.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I completely agree. From a professional standards point of view, and thinking about the professional standards that we want from all of our members, it's about building trust and confidence within the profession. And in order to do that, to build any kind of trust with anybody, it's so important for people to understand clearly their expectations of what they're going to get. So as you said quite rightly there, it's about the boundaries. So what is this? It's the same when you go and you are shopping for something. You want to know, for a washing machine, for example, what is the specification? What is it going to do? How much is it going to cost? What is the warranty if I need to have anything replaced? So I think it's really important we have to think around coaching and mentoring as a service that is being offered, and with that has to come very, very clear expectations around what this product is that people are selling. And by doing that, by having a good coaching agreement, you're building up the clear expectations of what that paying client is going to get from their services. What's your take on that, David? You're on mute.
Yeah, not for the first time, so like talking about I think you're absolutely right, and I think between sort of like what Monique was just saying, and what you just said, really it encapsulates everything. The one thing that I would probably add to that is the word agreement, and that it's about seeking the agreement between you and the person that you're working with, so that it's not, as I mentioned before, so it's not something that's forced upon somebody. It's right. You're like, what are we collectively aiming to achieve? You're like, what are we agreeing that we're going to do in terms of how we work together, how often we meet, like the outcomes that that we're looking at, the way that I will work with you as a coach, so that if we've done this all up front, if we've agreed that, there's a double-edged sword, because if I don't do what I've said that I've agreed to do, the client's well within the rights to say, look, you're like, I'm paying you for a service that I'm not getting at the minute, sunshine, so like, sort yourself out. But equally, as a coach, if at some point I think that a client is not moving or doing the things that they said that they were going to do, I can also go back to that agreement and say, look, when we started, you said that you were committed and you would do this and you would do that. That's not happened. So you're like, what's happening? Has anything changed? If it has changed, you're like, what is it? And although we call it a sort of a coaching agreement, it's intrinsically linked to a sort of a coaching contract. And that contract, which becomes ultimately the psychological contract, is like really important, because it allows you to then, if something changes, which can happen in the coaching agreement, I'm sure Monique will have lots of examples of, especially coaching in corporate, where all of a sudden, track one suddenly disappears and it's like, well, a lot's changed, we've been taken over, so we now need to do something else. is, well, okay, you're like, so we will recontract. You're like, we were doing this. What do we need to do now? And if that's not in place, you're going back to your washing machine analogy. It's a bit like, well, you said that this had, like a 1400 spin on it. Well, it doesn't. Like, it's only got like 1200. So, we need to do something about that. So the getting agreement is an interesting thing as well, because it allows the coach to find out a little bit about the personality of the individual while you're talking to them. Because if in that conversation you start talking about, right, well, how often would you like to meet? Like, how long would you like your sessions to be? As an example, and they go, I don't know, what would you recommend? Well, like, what would you recommend? You start to get that sense of, right, well, that's telling me a little bit about this client. Like, it sounds as if, just from that initial opening, are they going to sort of like be dependent? Are they always going to be looking at me, like, for the answers? And if that's the case, then I can adopt my approach suitably so that they don't get that. Equally, if somebody just comes straight in and goes, right, I want them, like every 4 weeks, and I want them at this time on a Wednesday, and so on and so forth, you get that other sense of, right, okay, like, there's a different like dynamic here, and therefore I can work around that. So the agreement bit is like a lot broader than just saying, right, like, let's tick these boxes, because it's a work in progress.
Yeah, fantastic, David. Thank you. I mean, I think it's really key, which you touch on there, which is about it's actually one of the first key bits about building rapport with the client, because you're learning a lot about that client in that moment, learning as well what their goals are. So it's starting the beginning of that journey, and what they're capable of, and also as well what some of the barriers might be to achieving some of their goals. It's giving you a lot of information. Monique, would you be able to sort of talk about how you would go about making a good coaching agreement, please?
Sure. And David, you made a great point about the goals that are laid out in the beginning, because normally with a client, with my corporate executives, we do start with goals. What is it that you would like to work on? And as David said, those can change over time, so they can be very fluid. But the coaching agreement allows us always to go back to that. It's a way to keep both people centered and focused on what it is they're trying to accomplish. So when I work with my corporate executives, we talk about goals, the length of the sessions, how often they would like to meet. And sometimes clients come to coaching really flustered. They might have 15 different things they want to work on, and they don't know where to start. And so the agreement also helps to solidify that and prioritize. Okay, let's break all this down and decide what we're going to work on first. So it's a way to get them centered, to talk about what happens if there's a cancellation. What is the protocol around cancellations? What is their contact information? How can I reach them? What's an alternate method of reaching them if I can't reach them the way that we agreed upon? And also in an agreement, I like to cover, how do you measure success? How do you know if you're progressing? Are we going to touch base every month or so and wrap back around and see how we're doing? So there's all of those different kinds of components that I like to have in my coaching agreement.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I think, that's it's such an important point in terms of how that agreement can really work for building that rapport. I think the point that for me was about actually, I've sort of mentioned a bit about that it's about building the trust for the client, but actually it provides a level of protection for you as a coach. Just the bit that you talked about in terms of cancellations. If you've got an appointment scheduled in your calendar to meet with somebody and they just cancel at the last minute, essentially, unless you've got it built into a coaching agreement about the terms of cancellation and cancellation fees, You could just be sitting there with a week of cancelled appointments and no money coming in, and that's still your time. Your time is still given. You could have booked somebody else in at that time. So if people are cancelling repeatedly, that can have an impact on your income and your business. So in terms of building it as a sustainable business, it's really important to think about when's a reasonable amount of time to accept a cancellation and a rearrangement of appointment, and actually when would you have to charge for that cancellation. And I think if that's very, very clear in the coaching agreement, somebody might think twice about cancelling at the last minute because they perhaps don't feel like it or whatever, and it holds people to account a lot more. So it actually makes them more engaged and a bigger participant in their coaching journey, because they know the rules of the agreement. What's your view on that, David?
Again, I agree. So there's I think there's always a degree of flexibility, because life gets in the way, and sudden things happen. And I think having it in the agreement, it gives people the general sense that, look, I'm aware that if I just cancel it because, then there's going to be some sort of repercussion with that. And there's always that thing. So with the coach, if somebody rings up and says, look, I'm really sorry, there was an emergency, I had to go to hospital or something like that, for the coach to turn around and obviously, it's entirely up to them. But if it was me, I would be a little bit sympathetic and empathetic about that and say, look, life gets in the way. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem. I'm not the sort of person to go, that's really tragic. I'm sorry about that. You owe me X amount of, X amount of money. But at the same time, having it in there is also a check of somebody's commitment, because if they start cancelling, even if they look and they go, right, well, if I cancel within 48 hours, I'm not going to get charged, and they start cancelling every 48 hours, then you start to pick up and go, right, there's something going on here. And it's either driven by the client, or if it's corporate, it's driven by the client organizer. Something's going on. And that can either be that they're not getting anything out of the coaching, or they're getting too much out of the coaching, and they're starting to feel uncomfortable. And that's a different conversation. And it's like everything else. You can put as much as you want into the coaching agreement, and it's that balance between not making it war and peace, and not making it the equivalent of a very small post-it note of, we'll do some coaching, sign here, please. And what I tend to do is I'll go through it, send them a copy of it, get a signed copy back, and then on that first session, I'll generally just briefly go over, is there anything in this that you want to go back over before we start? And if they say they do, we do. And if they say they don't, then we just move on with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think that's really fundamental is that actually also, whilst doing this, I mean, we talked about, and you mentioned earlier about that by going through the coaching agreement, you get to find out a lot more about the client and what they need. But actually, in a sense, also, it says a lot about you as a professional. So having a coaching agreement at the beginning actually symbolizes a level of professionalism because of that contract and agreement. Like you say, if somebody's just sort of, let's do a bit of coaching, sign here, what does, we've also got to think about the expectations of the service. And I'll share that I worked with I had a coaching client once who was actually a lawyer by background. So they came to the meeting, their first meeting, with the same expectation that I would if I'd have gone to them for some legal services, which is, this is the agreement, this is the price, this is the contact. And that for me was I mean, I'd got most of that in place anyway, but it really made it stand out to me because I went through explaining the terms and also explaining, and I've mentioned this in a few other blogs and things that I've written, but about what the complaint procedure is actually, and that, so what is their protection as a as a client, but it also is my protection as a coach. But explaining all of that made that person feel more secure and trust about in the context of the relationship that we were going to have. And I think, you know, for me, one of the important elements to always discuss in the coaching agreement is what happens in the event of a complaint. And I know that's one of my areas within the IAPC&M, but people think actually if you talk about complaints, you're going to attract more complaints. But actually what you're doing is it's another way of solidifying what the terms of the agreement is and saying, if you are not satisfied, this is what you can do and this is how we will resolve this. And it helps also build up that level of trust as well, which is, you know, the first port of call would be, for me, it would say, if you're not happy, come and talk to me about it. Let's see how we can resolve this together. In the event that you don't feel that you can resolve it, this is how you would make a complaint to me as an organisation. If you didn't feel that was resolved, this is the next step and the next step and the next step. And for me, I think that's really important to let that person know at the beginning that there is that avenue to go down if they're not feeling that they're not happy with the services. And just having that conversation doesn't automatically attract complaints. Actually, it gives a sense of openness to the client that this is okay and we can talk about it. And, you know, sometimes these things happen, and sometimes a complaint can come because a coaching agreement was not clear and established at the beginning of a coaching relationship. So you know, essentially that's what a lot of it boils down to, is sometimes it's a misunderstanding or a mis-expectation of what the services can be. Monique, do you have any experiences of good or bad coaching agreements that have happened? Or?
Yes, you've made such a good point about the complaint process. And one of the issues that should definitely be addressed in a coaching agreement that can help eliminate or reduce complaints is having that conversation about the difference between coaching, mentoring, therapy, consulting. They are all very different things. And sometimes clients are confused and they think when they sign up for coaching that they're going to receive one of those other things. And it's really important to clarify right up front what the difference is between those things and what they will be receiving in coaching, what coaching is all about, and that somehow gets written into the agreement. And I've made sure in my agreements that I've put disclaimers in there that this is not therapy. I'm not a therapist. And so again, to your point, Adele, it really helps to clarify everything that the client is going to receive when they have this relationship. And they have the opportunity, to David's point, to look through the contract or the agreement. If there's any questions, they can come back and ask questions before they actually sign the arrangement. So I, just from years of coaching, have learned that the best agreements are the ones that just clarify anything that's possible out there. You want to eliminate as much as possible any chances for confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such a key point. And me and David have talked at length about the issue between the difference between coaching and therapy and all of those kind of things. And I think actually sometimes the coaching agreement can actually be about the agreement not to do coaching, because I think, you know, you have to be in that point where you're finding out from that person what it is they want, what it is they need, and how you can establish that. And in that discussion and in that process, you could actually be understanding that coaching is not what this person needs right now. I had somebody the other day call, could I go and do some coaching, because they tried all this other stuff. And when I started asking the questions about what was going on for that person, coaching was not the thing that they needed. And actually they did need some deeper level psychiatric input for their care, and coaching would not have been beneficial to that person. Had we commenced on a coaching journey, that would have likely ended up in some kind of complaint, because they wouldn't have got from me the thing that they wanted. And so it's very difficult, I think, when you're starting out as a coach, to actually turn clients away. But it's probably the single most important thing to do, which is about knowing what your limits are and being very, very, it goes back to defining what it is that you can and can't do. Also thinking as well about sometimes when people come and say, I want coaching around this particular thing, just, you know, you're a coach, you should coach me about anything. And in a sense, there is an element that as a coach, you don't have to have a specific knowledge set, but I think it's also really important to know, are you the right coach for that person? Or is it a different coach with a different set of expertise that would be the best person to coach this individual? So I think that's also, you know, the coaching agreement can be about the agreement not to coach. I know we've had long conversations about that, David, haven't we?
Yes, we have, and it's almost counterintuitive, but the ability to and I'm hesitant to use the word repel, but repel is the word that sort of springs to mind. The people that either would not be a good fit in terms of sort of the chemistry, the relationship piece, or that you're not, you know, just generally not the right person for, or the client is not right for you, or they need something else, is just as important as, you know, being able to turn around and say, yeah, you know, like, I can help. And just picking up on one of your points, it's one of the things that we say in coaching quite a lot, that, you know, if you're a coach, you can generally work with, you know, like with anyone, but you need to be able to understand the language. And that is the one thing that, you know, if somebody sits down, you know, for example, and just, if it was a finance director, for example, and they turn around and say, look, I'm looking for, you know, career advice, career guidance, career coaching. And then you start to unpick that and go, right, well, yeah, there's three things in there. So you're like, which one is it you're looking for? Is it, you know, is it guidance? Is it coaching? Is it advice? You're like, you know, which one? So that, you know, like just little unpicking, because if it's the coaching piece and it's about, look, I need to understand, so like how to develop my career, I'll probably go, yeah, I can help you with that, and we'll have a conversation. If on the other hand, it's specifically all finance related, you know, and they're talking about a beta and, you know, like, and all sorts of weird things and tax deductibles, yeah, I'm just not going to understand what they're saying. So in that case, it's going to be, look, I'm not the right person for you, and based on what you've said, you might really want to be looking for a mentor rather than a coach, you know, because they're going to have that, you know, like that sort of skill set. And then you can make a recommendation or a referral, you know, you can part company, and both people end up in that, well, okay, you know, I didn't get a client, but I did the right thing. And what I often come back to is sort of like one of Noel Fitzpatrick, the Supervet's comments, which is, you know, is it morally correct and is it ethical, you know, the decision that you make about what you're going to do? And that is, you know, like equally true with working with clients. And I forgive me, I can't remember the Latin, but so like the whole ethos of the so like the medical profession of first do no harm, you know, is just as important if you're a coach, you know, like, or a mentor or training provider for that matter, as it is so like within the medical profession. So whereas, you know, and I'll hold my hands up metaphorically and say that, you know, when I started out as a coach, it was you know, I'm a coach, so I can help everybody on everything. So you're like, just like, bring it on. You're like, and I'm here, and, you know, the T grow and the grow model is the panacea for everything. And you learn through experience that that's not the case. You know, that there are people that you're just not going to gel with, that you're not going to have the chemistry with, and that agreement part, you know, even before you get into this, so like the real detail, that, like, you know, what are you looking for? What are you expecting? You know, what do you want to get out of this? Because some of it is tick boxy, but that real sort of like ability to get into it and understand, you know, the individual. Yeah, it for me, it always just comes back down to that. Am I the right person for them? And if I am, you know, from my perspective, can I actually work with them? They're like, am I gonna go into a coaching call with that neutral, right? You know, what's going on? How are you today? You're like, and then build from there, rather than like looking at my calendar and going, oh, no, you're like, please, you're like, I do not, I cannot want to face this person again today. And if that's starting to come on, there's a whole host of other things within the capability model that talk about that and where that comes from. But if you've got that, and you sort of think, well, you're like, well, why didn't I pick that up with the agreement? You're like, what did I miss? Because people will put on masks, and especially so like if they're coming into coaching for the first time, or they've had a previous experience, which is another good question. Have you, building on what Monique was saying, which is another thing, right? It's not all of these different things, but have you experienced those? You're like, what's your experience of coaching? What's your experience of counseling or mentoring? What brings you to this? Or you've been sent. Different conversation altogether, because there's then so like all of the, well, like, I don't personally think I need it, but apparently my boss and everybody else in the organization thinks I do, so you're like, here I am. It's a completely different conversation. And from that you've also got the bit, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, like the confidentiality piece, which is like usually between two people, but as I'm sure Monique will have great experience of, is, well, when it's in the corporate environment, sometimes you've got this three-way contract between the coach, the client or coachee, and then the client organization who's orchestrated all of this. And some of them will be, look, get on with it, it's confidential between the two of you, you're like, we don't need to know. And others will be completely reversed of, look, we want to know everything that comes out. So then you have a completely different sort of agreement, because there are more parties involved. So it's it can just expand.
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of touched, it was like you were in my head then, David. You just went straight on to confidentiality, and I was like, oh, wow, that's where I was going next. So that's really helpful, because in my mind I was also thinking about my experience when I first started out as a divorce coach, and I was working with a team of lawyers, and I would coach the clients privately and individually, but also being mindful of actually, where does the coaching sit in terms of their legal journey that they're going on. So you can't always necessarily go, oh, I'll see you every month for an hour a month or an hour a week, because actually sometimes it's about, I need to see you before I'm about to go into court, or after I'm going into court, or and then court's been delayed by 3 months. So how do we get around that configuration? But it also made me think about, I've sat on a number of financial negotiations as a coach, and what you're bringing into that room is you've got the lawyer there who has a relationship with the client and the knowledge that they have around the client, and then I'm there as a coach with the knowledge that I also have about this client. And here we are in this three-way triangle supporting this individual, but we might know different things about. And so how do you bring in, say something has come up in a previous session and you want to bring in sort of like referring back to when we've had that conversation, how do you feel about this going forward? Can you bring that into a session because there's somebody there that might not know that about that particular person? So I think it's absolutely key when you're also talking about confidentiality, and I'm sure Monique's probably got 1,000,001 examples as well in the corporate field, but how you navigate through that. And it's not just about having a carte blanche confidentiality agreement, it's about having a confidentiality agreement that suits that environment and that relationship for those people. And also being mindful with the coaching agreement and the confidentiality agreement, they can be revisited. So it doesn't have to stay a static document at the beginning of the relationship. It can be reviewed and renewed as the relationship builds and goes on in agreement with the client. What's your take on that, Monique?
Oh, that topic of confidentiality is so important, so critical. A couple things I'd like to say about that. So since I do coach corporate executives and I coach them from all different industries and very large companies, there are things that they are sharing with me in the coaching session that morally and ethically I cannot repeat because it's very confidential. And this might be financial statistics or other types of things that are going on internally within the company. So I take very seriously the ramifications of confidentiality or lack of confidentiality. So it's very important that that's in the agreement and that I, as a coach, honor that. And then the other thing is that many times I'm coaching people and then I find out that one of my clients reports to another of my clients. So I'm coaching the manager of someone else that I'm also coaching. And I'm learning information about both of them in separate coaching sessions, yet I cannot divulge any of that information to the other people. And it's very, you have to be very careful. You have to really honor that confidentiality, especially if one direct report is telling me that they're having all these problems with their manager and I'm coaching their manager. And the manager might be telling me that they're having all these problems with this direct report. It can be a very sticky situation without a confidentiality agreement, but that agreement is there to protect everyone. And as a coach, I really take that seriously because you do come across so many of those touchy situations, and you have to navigate around that in a way that's professional, moral, and ethical. So it's really important to have that in place. And then just to add something else here about what we were talking about a little bit earlier about making sure when someone enters into the coaching relationship, they are very clear on what they're getting, coaching, therapy, consulting. If that's not clear, and if someone takes on a client and is coaching a client and that client isn't getting what they thought they were supposed to get, then the relationship disintegrates and there are complaints and issues. If that relationship breaks apart, then there's a possibility that the coach can receive very negative word of mouth, because many of us receive our clients through word of mouth and positive comments and positive reviews. So if something disintegrates because there was a breakdown in the contract or the agreement, or there was no agreement, it's very hard on the coach, because then we start hearing and getting negative reviews, which affects then our ability to take on clients. So that's another reason why it's so important to have a really well put together agreement, and that both the coach and the client are on the same page with that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, you've got to have the protection for yourself, because, like you say, if things go wrong, you can. People could lose trust in you as a coach, because it's not been clear. And I think, and it's not just necessarily about you as a coach, but it's the coaching industry. Because I've had people before coming to me going, oh, I've seen a counsellor, therapy doesn't work for me. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, what type of therapy did you have? Was that, psychoanalytical therapy? Was it CBT? Was it person-centered? Because actually they're all different, and it might have been just that particular person. So sometimes it can be that a coaching relationship might come to an end because there's not the right rapport, or something doesn't work. But what you want it to do is you want to end on a positive note of that, okay, this isn't fine, that there is something else, as opposed to it being about anything that the person thinks that you've done wrong or is at fault. But likewise, I think, it's also about protection for us as professionals, in that, that you've got something that's there and that's defensible, because there's an agreement that's been made about what can and cannot be said and what cannot be discussed. And if you can evidence that what you have done is in line with the coaching agreement that person has signed up to, it gives you that level of protection in your business as well, so that you've got something that you're defensible with. Have you had any times, Monique, when it's gone wrong? I doubt it, but I'm just to throw it out there, just because I think sometimes it's helpful for us to share when we've done things wrong, that we reflect on and we can make things better for people.
Earlier in my career, I don't know that I would say it's gone wrong, but I think it's important to reduce the ambiguity as much as possible. So in the beginning, when I was earlier in my career and not really sure what to put in the agreement, there were things that were left out that could have been put in, that could have clarified things a little further up front. For example, payment terms. Like how do I want to be paid? How often? What happens if they're late on payments? I didn't always have that ironed out right off the bat. And I think it's because earlier in my career, I was a little hesitant to talk about money with clients. It seems unusual when you're in business. That's the main reason you want to be paid. But I was uncomfortable about addressing that, especially in writing. So over time, I learned that that is a really important component in an agreement, is the discussion around the payment terms. So over time, I've added more to my agreement and made it less and less confusing and just as clear as possible. I think that's really the bottom line, is to clarify everything.
Yeah, I mean, payment is one of those things, because I think, it's like you said earlier, David, you did your coaching and then you're like, now I'm a coach. But then you realize you have to become an expert in marketing, confidentiality policies, complaints policies, finance agreements, and all of those kind of things. And I think there was one thing for me that I learned was I'd set up, okay, if you pay me for X amount of sessions, you'll get a discount. So then somebody paid me for a bulk load of sessions, and they'd had, I think it was like 3 out of the 4 sessions. So then I've got this money sitting in my account, and the person hasn't booked their fourth session. And it was only talking to one of the solicitors that I was working with that they started talking to me about what you have to do when you're holding on to money for people. And it just became, oh my goodness, there's this minefield of like, so then I became into this thing about, actually, is this helpful, me be doing this and holding this money? So then I would send out monthly emails to the person to remind them, I have this amount of money sat in the account. Do you want it back? Do you want a coaching session? So that I could add in a clear process and a trail of what I was doing around this, because that wasn't part of the coaching agreement. I just built in this lovely offer that if you buy 3 sessions, get 1 free, or something along those lines. But then when you're thinking about all of those things, you've got to think about, what if that doesn't work, or what if something changes, and how do you manage that? So then I would further subsequent conversations with people would be very, very different because of that particular session. Do you have any areas, David, where you felt that what you've learned over the years to fine tune the coaching agreements?
Yeah, I mean, when I sort of first started off going sort of way back. Certainly when I was doing my practice coaching, there's a tendency within that, not to even issue a coaching agreement, because there's that, it's free, so it's really just practicing. So even though the topic's important, you sort of bypass that. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is that if you haven't got an agreement in place, the client can essentially just do more or less whatever they want without constraint. And one of the things that I learned very quickly from that, and I always build it into my agreements, and it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot, is, right, what's your commitment to this? Are you committed to doing the thing that you say you're going to do? Or is it a bit like a New Year's resolution thing that you think it's a good idea, but you're not really committed to it? Or you're doing it because you think you should, rather than because you're really motivated to do it? And I had an example of a client, and we worked on the issue for quite some while, and we kept going over it and over and over, and eventually I just got to a point where, right, look, we've been talking for this for quite a while. Is this something that you really want to do? And they went, yes. And they went, really? And they went, no, not really. I've sort of talked about it, but I'm not really committed. In fact, I don't want to do it at all, if the truth be told. I was like, oh, well, that's just great. 4 sessions of just me trying my best to be the best coach that I can with somebody who's committed to doing nothing. And eventually we went on to talk about something else, which was successful. And the more that I started to learn about agreements and, you know, what you put in, and, you know, as I say, so, you know, pushing the tick box stuff to one side, because the you know, how much is it going to cost, how often, and in what media, that's easy. You can just tick boxes on that. But that, you're like getting to, right, you know, how committed are you to doing this? You know, why is it important? And I appreciate it's the why question. And I'll hold my hands up. I ask why quite a lot. I tend to be quite, look, I want you to justify why. Is the, you're like, well, you know, why now? Why is it important? You're like, what's driving this? Where's your commitment coming from? How committed are you? How do you define you are? And getting all of that up front now, so like, you're like, when I look back in hindsight and, you know, bang my head off the desk and go, you're like, all the times I didn't say, well, you're like, how committed are you to this? And another example I had when I started to sort of like put this in place, but hadn't sort of mastered how I wanted it in place. I was working with I was working with the finance director on communication, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to improve communication, so like with his family, because he tended to be a troubleshooter, so he was sent all over the world, so he worked, you know, like all of the hours, you know, like that were available, and we were talking about the importance of, you know, getting home, you know, like, and having that, you know, that conversation, and it just at one point he just said, yeah, I'm committed to doing that. And then in the next breath was saying that, well, look, you know, I've decided that the best way for me to do this is on my way home on the tube, I'll email my wife with the content and agenda of the conversation that we're going to have when I get home. And I was like, right, okay, let's just go back to the commitment bit about, you know, wanting to engage on a face-to-face bit rather than just emailing the agenda of the conversations. And it took a while, but it was like now I understand where you're coming from. So the commitment bit, so like, is really important, like, for me. But they were the and I think the other thing as well is that, you know, even if you make a mistake, you know, even if you get really, really experienced and you look back and you go, you know what, I missed that, is not to beat yourself up over it. It's just to go, well, you know, I've recognized it now. I've learned from it. I've reflected. I'll do it differently next time. And it's, you know, because if our clients make mistakes and we accept that and allow that to happen, we have to do the same for ourselves as coaches as well.
I couldn't agree more, David. And I think that's one of the things that with all of this is about constant reflection and constantly honing your coaching agreement, because I personally think for every coaching agreement you do, no matter how experienced you are, there is something you will learn about a coaching agreement, and people will tweak it and change it and add bits in and take bits out, and so your people's coaching agreement will just get better and better over time. But just because it, you know, if there's a lot of learning from the first one, that's not the end of the world. Actually, what a gift to learn that, you know, to then make it better. So I think you're absolutely right. Being reflective about how well that coaching agreement worked is absolutely key. Just to a note that Monique had to go because she had a coaching call, and being boundaried and expectations in her, you know, I think that's fair enough. So because we were sort of running slightly over. So I'm just thinking that as we're coming to the end of this, one thing to potentially talk about in terms of, to wrap up in terms of in the coaching agreement, is actually endings. Do you discuss endings, David, when you do your coaching agreements?
Yeah, I always say to people, so like right at the outset, all of the things that that might happen, so like as we go through, so changes, when we come to the end, this is likely to happen. I tend to make a reference to references and testimonials and referrals, because if people are aware quite upfront that look, it's a business, and and I want to help as many people as I can, in certain areas. Therefore, if you're happy with what I've done and you would like to, give me a testimonial, if you'd like to make a referral, a recommendation, or put something on LinkedIn or social media or whatever, then when we get to the end, I'll remind you of that. It's a reminder. It's not a you must do this, because not everybody wants to do that, because not everybody wants people to know that they've been in coaching or anything. So I do that up front. I always let people know that, look, like when we come to the end session, so like the last, the last 10 minutes or so will be like a bit of a wrap up. Find out, right, where were you? Like, where are you now? I tend not to do sort of like full disengagements in the same way that I might do an intake, and that'll vary from client to client. But what, in my own opinion, so like what you don't want is that getting to if you've contracted for 6 sessions, for example, you get to the end of like number 6 and it's right. Well, thanks for that. You're like, bye, and it's because the client can then be thinking, okay, so what happens now? So that last session is almost like saying, like, when we come to the last session, it's going to be slightly different because we're going to be like really pulling everything together that's gone on over the previous ones, so that they're aware of what comes. And I mean, like some agreements might only be for a couple of sessions. In which case, it's like we'll probably do that in 2 sessions. So there's not a great need to talk about the end. If on the other hand you've said, look, we're going to contract for, as some of mine are, which is a 4-month or a 6-month commitment or more, then we'll talk at that point about, look, there'll be regular reviews, there'll be progress summaries, there'll be email support, and like X, Y, Z. And when we get to the end, there will be a big debrief on on where you're at.
And actually sometimes you get to the end and it's about a renegotiation of a continuation, can't it? I mean, and I think I'm always sort of quite clear when I take on clients that we've contracted for this, but actually if at any point during the course of that you feel you need less, you need more because the goalposts have changed or whatever, then let's have that conversation so that people know that they've got some that they're not, like you say, stuck to you've only got 6 sessions, which I think is a little bit more it's a bit more fixed in terms of the medical model, and therapy is a little bit more rigid like that, whereas coaching works on a different level. And it may be that client might come back to be coached about a completely different topic further down the line, and so, or it might say, well, I've achieved goal number 1, now let's move on to goal number 2 for 6 sessions or whatever. So I think that's I think it's important to discuss the end at the beginning, but know that actually the end could change and be different as to what the plans are. So I think we'll probably need to be bringing this to a close because we've done nearly an hour on the coaching agreement, and I think we could probably talk for a lot longer around knowing our conversations that we have sort of mulling these things over. So is there anything final that you think that the participants and the viewers would be beneficial for them to know additional to what we've discussed?
I think the thing that I would add is that although you've got the main coaching agreement, is never to lose sight of the fact that you need to do a sort of almost a mini version of that when you do your coaching session. So certainly for the capability assessment at all levels, one of the things that we will look for, one of the things that we will mark is at the beginning of your session, have you established the coaching agreement for that specific moment in time? And that's very much about, how is the session going to go? How long is it going to last for? What is it that you want to get? So, a typical question, what do you want at the end of this session that you haven't got now? And then, there's no real need, in my opinion, there's no real need to go back over, the confidentiality and the way that you're going to work. But you're reaching something, and what you don't want to be doing is setting that agenda. It's very much, right, what's going on for you? You're like, what do you want to do? And it's worth, again, my humble opinion, it's worth stating that no matter how much training you've got, or how much experience you've got, or how many techniques you've got in your toolbox, especially around question, I know that's one of the the later topics down the line, is that the only question that you can really prepare for a coaching session is, what do you want to talk about today? You're like, what is the outcome you want from this session? Because until they've answered that, you've got no real way of knowing. So getting them to articulate what it is that they want, just refreshing the mind about, okay, so this is the process that we're going to go through. This is what we're going to be looking for towards the end. sets like all of that, all of that in place, and equally that the coach is confident enough to look at what they've asked for and recognize whether it's too much to fit into the time that you've got. Because sometimes it's a case of saying, well, okay, that's a lot, that's a big topic, to cover in the time that we've got. How could you scale that back? If you had to break that down, what is it that you would want to achieve in the time that we've got? And that is all about agreeing the parameters for the session and the scope of achievement, so that both people come away going, you know what, that was a really good, powerful coaching session that both people got something out of.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, David. And we'll say thank you to Monique for her time with us today. So we will be moving on to our next session, which will be establishing trust and relationship with the client. So that will be our next call, and that is on the 20th of March at 3 o'clock. And I think we've got the lovely Monique with us again for that. So please feel free to join us on that. It's been great to have our attendees with us today. I hope you found it useful. And we will catch you then. Thanks all.
Thanks very much, Adele, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye now.